Greetings, faithful Herle Burlyites. I'm starting the pod today with a particularly accurate Apple podcast review from one of our tribe. His name is Chris Ray. Chris writes, Scott is hilarious. David laughs harder at his own jokes than anyone I've ever encountered. Brackets, it's awkward but also a little endearing, bracket. And Jenni is their perfect foil. Thank you for pointing all that out, Chris. I'm going to do some deep reflection tonight to decide whether I'm actually funny or just awkward and endearing. I'll report back to you on that next pod. It's a two-parter today. The Honourable Seamus O'Regan Jr, Minister of Natural Resources, is here for part one, and I'm excited about that. You all know Mr. O'Regan. 10 years a co-host of CTV's Canada AM, Member of Parliament for St. John's South Mount Pearl since 2015. We're going to talk about climate policy, the oil provinces and their economic prospects, national unity, conversion therapy, and of course, the upcoming election. Part two is the ever-lovin, ever-insightful political panel with me and our two comms and strategy gurus, Scott Reid and Jenni Byrne, the Fennel foil. Lots to talk about today. The Nova Scotia election is kicked off. We'll dive into what happened the first weekend and look ahead. It's a Manitoba meltdown in Brian Pallister's government. We'll dive into just what the hell is going on out there. And then we'll do an eve of the election mailbag. We put out the call for questions on our socials yesterday, and you responded. But believe you me, if you didn't have election questions, we'd have asked ourselves election questions. Yep, we're not above doing a little masturbating mailbag, folks. Cover your ears. And then, of course, it's our Hey You. Stick around for that. But first, Minister O'Regan, I want to welcome you to the Herle Burly. Thank you so much for being here.
10 years on Canada AM, David. I never heard the phrase masturbating mailbag, but here we are.
Well, that's why podcasts
different era.
are a little different. A different era. Where do we find you today, Minister?
St. John's, in my home.
In your home?
Yeah, this is where.
Have you been there the whole time, or
been here pretty much the whole time? I mean, there was one weekend early on, I think about end of May, where cabinet meetings were kind of in between, and you felt that I felt like I was left out. And in the beginning, at the beginning of the pandemic of May of last year, we were doing cabinet by speakerphone, and that is, I got to tell you, just the worst. So I flew in, and very quickly realized it's not a place I wanted to be. I mean, it was just, everybody was so tense and everybody was keeping their distance. May of last year, right? So never again. So I've stayed here. I've been here the whole time. So this is where I generally do question period. Here in my house, in my office. This is where, I do my house duty. And then we have a minister's regional office where cabinet ministers generally can go to do cabinet meetings, which are encrypted, but video, thank God. So, I feel like Newfoundlanders in politics are definitely, we're functioning, and the federal government functions. Everything is functioning. Everything's going very well. And cabinet, even by WebEx is works very well. But if you're a Newfoundlander, I mean, it's all about the socializing. Like, so-and-so's gone up to get a coffee. You're going to go up and talk to them now. So you miss the scuttlebutt.
Yeah.
I very awkwardly, my friend Mark Miller, who's the Minister of Indigenous Services, I mean, we were talking about this, and I said, I just miss the amount of intelligence that you get from gossip, that you get from the lobby of the House of Commons. That's the classic place. But anywhere in Ottawa, for instance, you're just out and about. That's where you find out information. And, I said to Mark, let's just try it. Like I'll just call you for 5-10 minutes and we'll just gossip. That didn't work. We 2 minutes in, we were like, what are we doing? Like this, that's not how it goes. So anyway, I'm looking forward, I'm looking forward to seeing what happens next and how we function. I think everybody's wondering this, as their family or as their business, but as the federal government goes, how it will function once we get back to normal, because there are parts of this that are very good. Being able to be closer to the people that you represent, being closer to your family, spending more time with your family. That part's probably not going to go away.
Right. But question period hasn't honestly been very effective this way, has it?
I don't find it as effective.
There needs to be probably in-person question period. Yeah.
Yeah, I miss the theater of it. I mean,
you got a nice setup there.
I think I have a bit of an advantage in that I'm used to talking to camera, and I'm used to talking intimately to camera because I wasn't trained any other way. I kind of, when I got into journalism, I was pretty green and got into TV journalism. So, what you see is what you get. And I just talk to camera like I do a friend, which is actually advice Pamela Wallen gave me very early on. And, but I also I used to be a theater. Well, she had good advice to me in very early days. She was extremely good to me, I have to say. But I was also a theater actor, and I know what it is. Sometimes in my early days, frankly, in Question Period, I got a little carried away with it. There is a fine middle ground where you're playing to a theater, you're playing to the house, and that's a great privilege. Most of us have been watching it our whole lives, and it's not the same staring in front of a camera. It's not the same.
No. Hey, I introduced you as Seamus ORegan Jr., which is new. You want to tell me about that?
Yeah, my dad had the same first name, and he passed away in November. I was very close to my dad, and miss him a lot lately. I miss him all the time because I talk to him every day on political issues and sought guidance from him. God, it just sounds so formal when you say it that way. I was talking to Dad, every day. So I just stuck it there. It makes me smile too, because in my early days, when I was 21, I got a job as executive assistant to Edward Roberts. And Edward Roberts was the Minister of Justice in Clyde Wells' government. He was also executive assistant to Joey Smallwood. So I then became his executive assistant when he was Minister of Justice. And Ed he was more than a teacher. He was a real mentor to me. In fact, I was just over to see him the other day, and he's almost 80, and he's in fine shape and still giving excellent political advice. But he, very early on, I'm dealing with constituency issues in my hometown, Happy Valley Goose Bay, where my dad was the Supreme Court judge, the first Supreme Court judge for Labrador. And but we have the same first name, right? Seamus ORegan. And I've always been known as Little Seamus or Young Seamus or whatever. But most people didn't know that. They knew Judge O'Regan, Seamus ORegan, and me. But this particular constituent, I was helping out with a title deed or something, and this had gone on for a couple of days. But I finally I got it for him. And constituency work is extremely fulfilling that way. And I solved the problem. And he went, I can't thank you enough, Seamus. Really appreciate it. I said, no problem. He said, so Judge, you do this on the side or what? And I told Dad this story, and the notion of a judge working for the Minister of Justice is just like not on. So Dad's like, you're getting new business cards, and they will say Junior on them, and that is how you will go. It took going on TV and being known, nationally as Seamus ORegan for him to kind of back off on that. But in honor of him, and it makes me smile, I put it back for a while.
Awesome. That's a great story. Thanks for sharing that. You mentioned Mark Miller.
Yeah.
And you guys are friends predating politics, right?
Oh, yeah. I mean, we were in the Prime Minister's wedding party together and all that, yeah. Yeah,
so you're friends with Justin, both of you, and that's kind of interesting. I'm actually not really aware of another circumstance where really close personal friends like that all went into government together. What's that like? What's that like to have actual friends there, as opposed to what friends are like in politics? It's a much more transient term.
It's a great question. That's actually not asked often enough. We are very formal about it, and I think that's why our friendship will probably survive all of this. We don't hang anymore. We've never spoken about it, but my personal feeling is that, the Prime Minister treats all his ministers equally. I know many people may not believe that, but he does. And you can't be hanging out as buddies and going to Harrington Lake or other things if you're in the cabinet, and I think have it function. It's interesting. I'm reading right now The Northern Magus by Richard Gwynne, which I'd never read, and I just picked it up and I couldn't put it down.
Great book.
Richard's such an amazing writer. And you did have in Pierre's cabinet kind of, tiers of people. And I just think that my own feeling on that is I think the personal dynamics of it is it's just a headache and a distraction. I think we're adults here. Prime Minister is a very close friend. Mark's a very close friend. Mark and I, as ministers together, I mean, we can talk and hang and do all that. If you're Prime Minister, it is very difficult to do that. And I think that, the PM is more of his dad in that sense, in the sense that he's disciplined, but I think he's moved that discipline over to relationships because I think he's had to. I think he knows that I'm here for him anytime and in any way that I can be, personally or professionally. To be honest, there's very little that we disagree upon. I mean, we've been talking about issues like reconciliation and climate change. I mean, in the entire time I've known him, which is now, 20 years. So, we knew at the outset that we think very much alike. I got his back. He knows that. But I think that there has to be a cool remove in order for it to work.
All right.
I miss the guy, though. He's a great friend. I got to tell you, like the most loyal, fun friend you could have.
Yeah,
I miss the guy. But this is how it has to be. And I know when it's all over, we'll get right back to where we were.
Right. Hey, I looked up your academic background, and it's pretty heavy stuff. It's pretty serious. You've done a lot of studying at some very serious schools. What were you ever doing hosting a morning show?
I'm a curious guy. It's a funny story. I did my master's across the pond. I worked in Paris at an MBA university there for a year. And when I got back, I did what anybody with a master's in philosophy does. You live in the basement of your mom and dad's house, looking for work. And which is exactly where I found myself. But I'd been in Europe for 3 years, and I was intent on coming home to Newfoundland particularly. And I had some good job offers because in between the time I worked for Edward Roberts, I went to Ireland for a year to try and figure out what they did with the Celtic Tiger phenomenon in the 90s, how Newfoundland could emulate that. Came back, worked for Brian Tobin as a senior policy advisor for 2 years, went to Cambridge to do my master's, then INSEAD, and when I came, I was kind of like, I'm coming back to Newfoundland. So I had some pretty good job offers because I've met a lot of good people during my time in working particularly with Brian. And a friend of mine, Deanne Foley, she's a noted director here in the province, but at the time she was working for CTV in Halifax, and they had a show that they were developing called The Chat Room, taking advantage of this newfangled internet and the ability of people to interact with television. And this was the brainchild of Yvonne Fitzon and Suzanne Boyce, who were in charge of CTV at the time, and brought it to #1 in the ratings, where it stayed for a long time. They were looking for
they knew something about television, those people.
They did, and they were looking more than I did. I didn't know what the heck they were doing looking at me. They had developing a show where they wanted people with no experience and no training. And so my friend Deanne in Halifax, at CTV in Halifax, called and said, "You have no training, but you can't stop talking, and I think you'd be good at this." And she had directed me in several plays together when we were in Dublin together. She was a roommate of mine in Dublin, Newfoundlander. Anyway, I went, okay. They called and they said, "Can you drop by our Halifax studios?" And I'm like, "Well, are you paying for the flight, or are you putting me on the ferry? How's this going to go?" And I could tell by the pause on the phone that this is somebody from Toronto who just figured that St. John's was a suburb of Dartmouth. And I didn't want to get into that. So I hung up the phone, and my mother said, "Call him back. You're going to go." And it turns out that my brother, who just retired from the Navy, he was stationed in Dubai. He was coming to St. John's, to our home in St. John's, to pick up his Jeep and to drive it to Halifax. And Mom said, "I need you to go on Moose Watch. I'll pay for your flight home." So I went on Moose Watch. I got to Halifax. I said, "Yeah, I'm here." They put me in front of a camera. They put it on a DVD and couriered that DVD, because this whole video thing wasn't happening yet. Couriered the DVD to Toronto, to Yvonne and Suzanne, and they looked at it and they said, "Come to Toronto, and this time we'll pay." I figured, okay, flight to Toronto. They brought me to Toronto. I did that. They said, "You got the job." I said, they told me how much they were going to pay me. I went, "No, that's okay." And when I hung up, my mom and dad said, "No, you're taking it. You're going to take it." And I went, "No, I want to stay here." And they're like, "Newfoundland will always be here."
They really wanted you out of the basement.
They really wanted me out of the basement.
I
was working hard. I was paying my rent by gardening. In fact, those shrubs 20 years on are still doing really well. But they said, "We're having people over for dinner tonight to congratulate you. So you will take it. And I did. And my brother, years later, he said, he was at his wedding, and he said everyone's all excited because my brother Seamus is here from Canada AM. He said, if it wasn't for me and the moose, none of this would have happened. And he's right. and very early on, and it gets better, David. Like 3 weeks into that show, Pierre died. And I was very emotional about it. I reviled Pierre. I mean, I had this framed before. I had this picture here framed with a quote: "I know a man whose school would never teach him patriotism, but who acquired that virtue when he felt in his bones the vastness of this land and the greatness of those who founded it." I had that framed and up there before I knew Justin. And so I spoke about Pierre, and Yvonne and Suzanne were not watching CTV News Channel. They were watching us. And they called and said, "We want you on Canada AM the next morning." And I did not sleep at all. And the next morning was on with Valerie Pringle, Dan Matheson, Pamela Wallen, Mike Duffy, and Craig Oliver. And I was seated in the middle of them to shake things up.
The classic lineup.
The classic lineup. I just, just sitting in my own excrement. I mean, it was, I was tongue-tied. But then they kept having me back on Canada AM every week. And I knew I wanted it. And at that point, this wasn't a fluke anymore. I wanted the job. I fought hard for it. I got a good agent, and we lobbied, and I got it. And the irony is, Tobin called me after it was announced, and he left a voicemail. You remember voicemails? This would have been 2002. And it was just him laughing for about a minute, and then he hung up. Because when I worked for him, I didn't show up at a single senior staff meeting, and I didn't show up in the office till about 10 or 11. I would work until about 1 or 2. I did my best writing after midnight because I wrote speeches for him and all sorts of stuff. And he said, "You won't last a week." So out of spite, I lasted 10 years. I love that job. It was a great job. Great job.
Hey, Tobin. Tobin was such a good politician. So good at politics. Yeah. Did you know that he would be even better at business? Isn't it amazing that he's even better at business? He has been a fantastic success in the business world.
Yeah, I mean, it struck me very early. Like I had been in Ireland. I had been studying the Celtic Tiger. I went over to the great university my grandfather went to, who came over from Ireland. And when I came back to Labrador, which is where we were still living at the time. And Labrador was in it was going to combust. Labrador is a very sometimes antagonistic relationship to the island. And between, overriding Indigenous issues and like significant infrastructure gaps and all this stuff, things were ready to explode. So I took it upon myself to write a 1-page bullet point brief on what he needed to do as the new premier in order to bring Labrador back in. I had significant gumption back then. And he took it, and I got a phone call saying, "We'll fly you down. Premier wants to meet with you." Met with him. And I had thought at that point, and I think it was kind of an overriding consensus, even after the Spanish fishing war, that, the guy was all about communications and panache and ambition. But there's, and very early on, what was meant to be, a 15-minute chat turned into an hour and a half. And he showed me the long-term communications play that he had for development of the Lower Churchill River and for Voisey's Bay. And I was hooked. I'm like, hire me now. And I was his policy guy for 2 years. With Voisey's Bay, for instance, he understood very quickly, this is the world's richest nickel find. And, I've got one of the first core samples on my office actually in Ottawa. And very quickly we realized that, Inco, who had bought it, now Vale, but if they just scooped out that ovoid, surface ovoid, they'd be gone, and Newfoundland would be none the richer. The trick was, how do you get them to make the capital investment to go underground where the other deposits were? And that's significant capital investment. And Tobin wisely realized that you needed them to invest in the province in the form of a smelter. So suddenly, they were calling him, Brian Chavez, a moniker that they gave Danny Williams later, and Seymour Schulich and all these guys just, in the National Post, and everybody just crapping on Brian, and, can't do business in Newfoundland. He knew what he was doing. And they knew he knew what he was doing. And proudly, by the way, those underground mines just opened a couple of months ago. So 20 years later, he was right. That was the long-term play. He knew what he was doing. They knew he knew. So while everybody was lambasting him in the business press, a couple of years after he resigned as Minister of Industry, he was the talk of A Street. And I saw the gumption that he showed in those rooms. I was in those rooms when he had to negotiate. I was in Inco headquarters, and it's antagonistic, and there's a lot of swinging but he knew how to play it, and he was good at it. And the extent of how good he is, I'm just happy that it's appreciated, to be honest with you, because he deserves it. And I think he was one of the most transformational premiers that this province has had. People were ticked off with him when he left. They were angry, and there's still a resentment towards him for leaving. He had promised he wouldn't leave, and he did leave. He left to become industry minister, and he left because I think he thought he had a shot at becoming prime minister. Yeah, and it became very clear that your team and Paul were way ahead.
If Paul Martin hadn't existed, he would have been a great choice. He would have been a great choice if Paul hadn't existed.
Yeah, he would have been a great choice. I mean, coming into work for him,
respect for him.
It was as a staffer. What a joy to work for that guy. I mean, he demanded a lot, he challenged a lot, but God damn it, he was fun. And there was nothing. I mean, we had an education referendum here. I was a big part of that campaign. And this is on after, this is after what, the movies, this is before the movie Spotlight, before the Irish dealt with it, before Massachusetts dealt with priests and Christian brothers who were abusing young boys, and a church that covered it up, and a government that was complicit. And, people wanted to, up until that point, there was no public schools per se, no secular schools in Newfoundland. There were Catholic schools and Protestant schools. And this is a result of joining Confederation. It was in the Constitution. We had a referendum, a binding referendum, binding in the sense that we went and we got the Constitution changed to allow for public schools in this province. I mean, he did so many things here and turned so many things upside down, but he read the public mood right, people who were ready for it. And he was exactly the premier that we needed at the time. I'm still so proud to work for him, still talk to him very, very, very frequently, and he still weighs in with his advice.
Awesome. Well, he probably doesn't listen, but Brian Tobin, there's your shout out. You might not have expected it from the Herle Burly. There's a town of about 17,000 just west of Edmonton called Stony Plain, Alberta. Up until 1892, the place was known as Dog Rump Creek. It was probably a good move to change the name. I'm sure the town founders wanted to add an air of legitimacy to a growing settlement. And we know branding is everything, don't we, Herle Burlyites? I wonder how those early settlers would have reacted to an investment of $43 million coming into their community. Because that's what's happening in Stony Plain right now. And it's from our presenting sponsor, TELUS. TELUS is investing billions in a handful of small communities across Alberta through the end of 2024 to improve digital connectivity as we emerge and recover from this pandemic. It's part of their larger investment to support rural and remote Canadians at a time when they need it most. For Stony Plain, it means the town is going to be connected to TELUS's award-winning Pure Fiber wireline network. The work is starting in about a month and a half, and it'll enable flawless, super-fast connectivity so residents can work with large files, virtually connect with healthcare practitioners, learn from home, and unlock all kinds of new opportunities for business. It's exactly that kind of investment that bridges the geographic and socioeconomic divides in this country. Translation, Stony Plainers can live and thrive right where they are in Stony Plain without losing out on the opportunities of a major metropolis. Pretty heady stuff for a place that used to be named after the business end of man's best friend. You can find out much more about all this at telus.com/connectingcanada. All right, let's get to some meat here.
Yeah.
What's your job? Normally, in any government I've observed before, I know what the job of the Natural Resources Minister is. It's to promote unabashedly the natural resource sector in the country. But you're a part of a government that has climate change as its number one priority, and B, has taken a stricter environmental approach to all types of resource extraction than previous governments have taken. So what is the job of the Natural Resources Minister in this government?
I would say that I would say my job is not to just kind of promote, as it were. My job is to ensure the prosperity of those industries. And if you want to ensure the prosperity of these industries, then you have to take climate change into account, because the markets are taking climate change into account. When I was first sworn in, after that election, in which natural resources and the environment and the economy were quite prominent, and we were reduced to a minority government, and we were shut out of Alberta and Saskatchewan. I'll tell you. Well, I haven't told this publicly before, but when after I've had Veterans Affairs, which is an extremely challenging portfolio, and was certainly challenging when I was there, and after Indigenous Services, which is always challenging. After that election, when the Prime Minister looked at me and said, "You've got natural resources," I burst out laughing. Like this is the job, because it was such a monumental challenge to come out of that. And then I girded myself for it. And one of the best things that happened is a mutual friend put me in touch with Sonia Savage, and who's the energy minister in the Alberta government. And as soon as I was sworn in Rideau Hall, and before I'd even appeared in front of the media, in front of the scrum, in front of Rideau Hall, she texted me and said, "Congratulations, when you're coming to Alberta." And I texted back, "House tomorrow." And flew out the next day. And I've had a very good and very professional, but very good, sincere relationship with Sonia Savage and with Bronwyn Eyre, who's the energy minister in Saskatchewan. Because I think that we all realized that, okay, there was a lot that happened in that election campaign, but the prosperity of this country and the prosperity of their provinces and the prosperity of my province, as the third oil producing province, is just too important. And we got it, very, very serious about this. And there began a very good relationship. I had to speak in front of Globe, which is the biggest clean tech conference in North America, shortly after that Christmas. I got up in front of them and I said, "You will never get to net zero without Alberta. You will never get to net zero without Saskatchewan. You will never get to net zero without Canada's oil and gas industry. That is a fact." The next day, Sonia and I she had initiated this, and I co-hosted with her an innovation summit with the oil patch, all the senior players in the oil patch in Calgary the next day, and said the inverse to them. You will never prosper without net zero. And my argument to them was, look at the markets. The nightmare situation for us, and it is a constant challenge for us, is that investment houses will, around the world, were starting to divest themselves of Canadian oil to show that they were taking climate action seriously. In other words, climate action was becoming synonymous with divesting from Canadian oil. And that is an extreme. We were becoming the box to check. Like the guy in charge of the fund in Zurich or in New York or in London is looking down the boardroom table at his junior analysts and saying, "What are we doing about climate?" And they're saying, "We're divesting Canadian oil." Okay, good. Box to check. I said, unless we start to look at the other side of the ledger on what the box is to check to show that we are serious about climate action, this is going to end very badly for this country. And not just the sector, but the prosperity of the country. And I said, a year and a half ago, it was starting to congeal around net zero. Now that we know that's the box to check to show that you're serious. And now look, you've got the oil patch that has come together in the Oil Sands Alliance committing to net zero. My argument, they were like, and you're dealing with a bunch of engineers, so it's a difficult argument. But I mean, early on, it was like, guys, they're like, but we don't know the path to get there. And I made an argument, I think, that was misconstrued in the media. And they called, when I said it's a moonshot. And a moonshot doesn't mean it's like, dare to dream kind of thing. A moonshot is Kennedy's moonshot. We're going there. And the military industrial complex of the United States through the 1960s focused and got us there. So you got to commit, and then we're going to all, together figure this out. So you got to challenge the sector as well. It's not just, blind promotion of our sector. It has and continues to need to be challenged, but I challenge in the interests of its prosperity, because its prosperity is synonymous with Canada's prosperity. We are the fourth biggest producer of oil and gas in the world. And I appreciate that every day, because from my office and from just about any downtown office in St. John's, you see the boats heading out through the Narrows, heading out, the supply vessels heading out to the offshore. I'm reminded of it all the time. the problem I think is that many Canadians don't know that or don't appreciate that. And I think that particularly on the oil sector, it's kind of like a marginal thing that they do over there, or those people do. It is absolutely essential to the prosperity of this country. It is who we are.
Do your colleagues appreciate the significance of oil and gas to Canada's balance of trade?
Yes, they do. Yes, they do. I think that, let's be honest. I mean, it's a nuanced thing then, like how fast do you go? Where do you go? How significant do you take it? What kind of investments do you make? Is this a subsidy? Is this not a subsidy? And those are, not just arguments that I feel that we should have as a government within our government, but it is I think it is an honest argument that, that we need to be having in the House of Commons and that we need to be having as a country. But we have to accept certain things that are true. We are the fourth biggest producers of oil and gas in the world. And countries that we immediately equate as oil producing countries, whether it be Iran, Iraq, or Kuwait, or Bahrain, they're all in our wake. And that is significant. And you have to really absorb that in order to fully fathom the challenge that is before us, because it is significant. But, I'm determined to do it. And I think, increasingly, I look at May 26th, which was a date that I marked on my calendar. ExxonMobil had basically a coup d'etat on its board of directors. You had 3 or 4 of the biggest public pension outfits in the United States say you are going about things the wrong way and you are burying your head in the sand, to the world's biggest, publicly traded oil company. You had Royal Dutch Shell. The Hague said you are going to do this by then because you're nowhere close to hitting your emissions targets. And Chevron had a shareholder revolt, and it all happened on the same day. And it happened a week after the International Energy Agency said we got enough oil. And they were the agency we set up in the 70s to tell us when we have enough oil. And that was the study that, Canada, amongst other countries, asked them, we commissioned. So, none of those things were coincidental. The market is moving. When the market moves, it moves quickly. And we have an administration now in the United States. And I think a lot of people in the country get this. We've gone from the Trump administration, as the prime minister said, every time you did a communique with Trump, you had to extract the words climate and change. And now you got Biden who says, I want those words in a 30-point font and I want them in the headline. That is, a 180.
Right.
And they are our biggest customer. They are our closest friend, our strongest ally, and our biggest competitor. And they're moving. And when they move big. So those are the facts. Now, the rest is, how do we get there? How do we do it? How do we find, that balance? How do we ensure the prosperity of this country and the prosperity of all regions of this country? And how do we look after people? And at the same time, make sure that we urgently lower emissions. That ain't easy. And frankly, it's not a bumper sticker play. It took me a long time just to say this to you. And that, as a guy who has worked in politics and worked in media, this is the greatest communications challenge, that I may ever face. And I've faced some pretty big ones. But this is a doozy, and it's far more given to, bumper sticker solutions. And it's not that easy. I believe that most Canadians get that. But certainly Canadians living in Alberta, Saskatchewan, and Newfoundland and Labrador who have proximity to the oil industry have a much greater appreciation, I think, of the challenge that lies before us.
Okay, but let's talk about, it's a huge communications challenge, but it bedevils me as a policy challenge because presumably by 2050, we're either producing no oil and gas or not much oil and gas.
No, I'll interrupt you there, David. We will be zero emission. That's what it means.
So how big is the oil and gas sector in Canada in 2050?
Well, it depends on, I think it depends on the market. I mean, that's not a dodge. That is actually a statement of pride, because I think that as soon as we can bring it to the marketplace, and I'm seeing that now, I don't have faith in much. I have faith in the market. The government has a duty and a responsibility, and I believe that we've done that over the course of the past few years, to point the market often in the right direction. Because, the market often is interested in short-term gain, but I think that, increasingly what was considered a medium and long-term threat to our prosperity in terms of natural resources, particularly oil and gas, is now becoming a short-term play. People realize that now. I think, again, May 26th was kind of a seminal day for me because it really brought it to the fore. But now, I mean, you're watching the market and you're watching governments taking this extremely, extremely seriously. In fact, if I was going to point to anything, I would say that one of our bigger challenges right now is in developing nations, which don't have, as many of the levers that we have. Making sure that they start making those right investments right now is a responsibility I think that we also have to take on. But anyway, that's a far bigger issue. We've got enough just trying to deal with it in this country. But it's all about lowering emissions, and it's all about zero emissions by 2050. So, I have, we have made investments working with the oil and gas sector, on technologies. We continue to make them. We do not believe that those are subsidies if we can work with the industry in order to lower emissions and in order to get us to net zero. That is.
Sorry, though, but you've said we can't drive cars. We can't drive internal combustion cars anymore by that point, right? So that's a lot of oil and gas usage gone.
Yeah,
we are going to be cutting back. I guess the question I want to get to here is the economy.
Yeah,
because if we're cutting back on that sector, it's resources that have made us a prosperous country, as
absolutely.
prosperous as we are. And if you were to just say oil and gas is gone, we are a poorer country, not just Alberta and Saskatchewan and Newfoundland and Labrador, but the country's poorer. People in Ontario and Quebec have less money because that industry is gone. What are we doing about that?
I hear you, but here's the threat that I'm telling you that is almost more immediate. Investors are pulling out. Unless we can demonstrate that we are going to do our level best to mitigate change, they will pull out their investments. So,
because the oil sands are bad emissions, the oil sands have high intensity of emissions.
They do have a higher intensity of emissions. But here I don't have faith in much, but I also have faith in this. In 2 generations, we have we took the oil sands. We figured out how to get oil out of sand first of all, and we went from being a more minor oil player to being the 4th biggest player in the world. We did that in a generation and a half. Here in the offshore, and I was working for Brian when we had first oil in Hibernia. We are so good at offshore oil. I mean, and the reason being is the president of ExxonMobil Canada said to me once, there is no more hazardous environment that ExxonMobil operates in the world than the Newfoundland offshore. So if you can do it there, you can do it anywhere. And my and we're working on just transition right now, David, amongst other things. And my feeling on that is that there is an incredible amount of determination and ingenuity and hard work that went into creating the oil sands. And I am proud of that. And I am proud of what we have created in the Newfoundland offshore. But what I implore now is that we need that same ingenuity, that same determination, that same drive, in order to lower emissions and to do it urgently. And we need to do it here, and we need to do it out west. And if we can demonstrate to the world that we are doing that on carbon capture sequestration, on electrification, on a more of a long-term play with small modular reactors, if we can do these things in order to lower the emissions, all the better. Because here's the thing, and it is quite true. Oil is not going anywhere anytime soon. This is not a switch that you can turn on and off. 78% of humanity's energy continues to come from fossil fuels. It takes a while to right that ship and to steer it in a different direction. It is monumental, the transformation that has to happen. But in the interim, what can we do to minimize those emissions? That's the trick. And that's what we have to show. We are Canada. The world does look upon us. And frankly, they do hold us to a higher standard because we are Canada. So the onus is on us to demonstrate to the world that we can do this. The good news is if we can become early adopters in lowering emissions in this sector and in other sectors and other parts of the economy, that immediately becomes something that we can export. Because I can tell you, our biggest, we introduced a new clean fuel standard. Trust me, the refineries to first adjust to that clean fuel standard weren't Canadian refineries. They were American. They are retooling refineries south of the border to meet our clean fuel standards, to meet our energy needs. So this is becoming very competitive very quickly.
Right. You talked about having pretty good relations with the provincial governments, which is interesting to me because overtly, optically, their political strategy in Saskatchewan and Alberta is to make the Trudeau government the villain of the story. So it's interesting that you have good behind-the-scenes working relationships. But
Yeah.
The question for me is this. Do you believe, since we have a national policy, which I support, by the way, wholeheartedly, of over time shutting down the industry that powers the economies of 3 provinces in this country, that those provinces deserve some compensation for that, whether that's through equalization or financial stability or direct transfers or industrial investment? It's odd. I mean, I guess from the East Coast, you may argue the fishery has been similar, but that's a little bit different. This is a national policy that has a peculiar impact on 3 provinces.
Yeah. 2 things. First of all, it has a peculiar impact and a more direct impact on 3 provinces, but let me be very clear that the oil and gas industry is something that the entire country relies upon. It is the biggest part of our economy. It is our number 1 export, no matter how you cut it. It's just that our 3 provinces have a very much clearer view of that than the rest of the country. Secondly, we are not shutting down the oil and gas sector. Quite the opposite. I want to make sure that it leads the world in innovation, in lowering emissions, in hitting our targets, and hitting net zero by 2050. We are making significant investments in carbon capture, and the Norwegians have a way of doing it, and they've been doing CCUS for quite some time on their offshore. They just call it putting carbon back where it came from.
Does it work?
Yeah.
Does carbon capture work? It was a Brad Wall idea, so I assumed it was a climate denier's idea. Is it an actual idea?
It works. It works if you have the market mechanisms to make it work. This is where price on pollution comes in. And suddenly things like CCUS are no longer kind of like an idealist thing to do, or, a kind of a token thing to show that we are doing something. It becomes a very significant play. The Americans are taking this very, very seriously. The Norwegians have been doing it for quite some time. This is very real. This is very real. You put carbon back where it came from. As I said, like 78% of the world, of humanity's energy is completely reliant on natural gas, on coal, and on oil. So what do you do in the interim? Solar panels do not grow on trees. We are moving in the right direction. And the amazing thing that has happened, I think, over the course of the pandemic is just the cost of renewables has gone down. It has gone down significantly. But the market is reacting to that. And so you see the supers and the big ones like ExxonMobil and these other countries, and even state-owned enterprises, as in Saudi Arabia and Russia, are now looking at renewables. They're divesting because even the singular shareholder of Amoco in Saudi Arabia is demanding that. They see the writing on the wall. You need to diversify your energy envelope, however you want to put it. But oil is going to be with us for some time. It's one of the reasons why, as you pointed out, I mean, we're looking at internal combustion engines, new cars not being sold any further than 2035. It's because we know that, the lifespan of most cars is 10 to 15 years. So you need to shut her down at 2035 to make 2050. That's the easiest way that Jonathan Wilkinson has explained it to us, and it makes an imminent amount of sense. That is one of the ways that we will reach 2050. It is not shutting down our oil and gas industry. It is a significant challenge, though. There's no question. But we are seeing over the course of the past year, I have seen such a demonstrable change in attitude, and we are seeing investments being made by the oil sector in this country. They get it. They see which way the markets are moving, and they understand they got to move too.
Okay, let me flip the argument around on you.
Yeah.
I don't see in the world, across the world, any of the kind of mobilization of resources. I know there's activity happening, and Mark Carney talks about finance moving, and I know things are happening. But I don't sense the kind of global mobilization and urgency that would be required if one genuinely believed that the carbon budget ran out in 2050 and it was catastrophic to miss that target. I just don't sense that urgency in the world. We're not going to make those targets, are we?
No, we're going to make those targets. I see that urgency every time I attend International Energy Agency meetings all the time. I'm a founding member of their Global Commission on a People-Centered Recovery, getting back to how this affects workers and their families in the industry. It's just that, look, if you take that super tanker or that container ship, however your nautical metaphor, and you want to move it If you move it, it moves incrementally, but it moves substantively, and it moves in a direction that is close to irreversible unless you want to go back in the same way you came from. So you don't often see it with your eyes. It does not always meet a 24-hour, 7-day-a-week news cycle. It is happening. It is happening. That money is moving. Governments are moving. It is happening. If you move a boat too suddenly, it capsizes. That's the trick. We live in democracies. People vote.
But the date on the other end, the scientists tell us that one thing is a fixed number, can't be negotiated with. So, when you're talking about the art of moving the tanker, well, what if the tanker doesn't move in time?
Oh no, it ain't an art. It's a science. I know what you're saying. You listen. In democracies, if you are intent on significant change, and I would argue that we are a government that is and has put in, some of the most sweeping changes that we have seen on environmental policy and climate change policy that the country's ever seen. But if you do not manage that with the prosperity of people and with a certain amount of economic stability, you will be voted out by people, and people will be elected who are not as ambitious as you are. It is as simple as that. Right. That is the democracy we live in. So trying to find that balance is something that I am reminded of every day, because my neighbors and my friends here in St. John's, Newfoundland, work in this industry. This is a province that is more reliant upon those oil royalties than Alberta. So I have skin in this game. I get it. And I'm reminded every day of finding that balance. People here are as worried about climate change as anywhere else. We are seeing more significant weather patterns. Hurricane Igor killed people here. I mean, that is something that we hadn't seen. Newfoundland is known for its weather, I know, and it's not always the best, although I am very proud of the fact that I've got a bit of a Newfoundland tang going here. But the bottom line is that while the temperatures have risen a little bit here, the weather patterns have gotten more extreme. We see it. People here see it. And when they've polled people here in Newfoundland, it's about where, I felt myself and where I've, invoked change here in this province. We have put the investments that we have made here in the industry to workers and to lowering emissions. That, I think, is the sweet spot. I mean, last year when the pandemic hit and we were you had incredible pointed tumultuous tumult in out west in Alberta and Saskatchewan and here in Newfoundland. What could we do? Orphan and inactive wells, $1.7 billion, employing tens of thousands of people. And the reason why that was important wasn't just to make sure
Why is that the taxpayer's job?
Because a lot of those companies believe it.
But why is
because a lot of those orphan and inactive wells are from numbered companies or companies that no longer exist, and they are sitting there whether you like it or not. So you got to clean them up.
That's bullshit, man. That is bullshit.
Yeah, no, and we're going to work. We're already working with the Alberta government to make sure that this doesn't happen again. And I can tell you that Minister Savage and Premier Kenney have said, devoutly that if we're going to do this from now on, we got to be serious about this, and people got to clean up. And I agree with that 100%. But at the time, here are the wells. No one's cleaning them up. Let's clean them up. That's bottom line. Right. But I just want to make sure that I make the ulterior motive here very clear. And I'll be making later today an announcement on just transition and the consultations that we'll be doing on just transition. A phrase that I'm not a big fan of, but this is not charitable. And actually, it comes back to a guest that you had on that actually, in an interview that you did, David, with Chris Arcadi. On Dignity?
Arnaudy. Chris Arnaudy, yeah. Wasn't he? Yeah.
He was amazing. And I was already there, and he kind of cemented it for me, although what I learned about McDonald's was extremely insightful. But although he was dealing more with the extreme marginalized poor, dignity is something that we all have in common. And when we did orphan and inactive wells, and what we're doing now with Just Transition is not charity. It is to keep the people in play that we will need to lower emissions. Who the hell do you think is going to lower emissions? This is complex engineering. This requires people who know what they're doing, who have the experience and the expertise. These are the people who I know here. And back in the day when I would fly back and forth to Toronto to get to Ottawa, trust me, business class is filled with the workers of this country who know what they're doing in this area. They are the ones who we're going to need. We will need to lower emissions. We need to keep them in play. Here in Newfoundland, I got too many people who I see who are moving to Trinidad and Tobago and to Guyana, to Nigeria, to Mongolia. They're flying all over the world. I mean, our expertise here, and the same, obviously, in Alberta and Saskatchewan. I don't want them moving to other industries or to other jurisdictions. We need them. They are valuable. So Orphan and Inactive Wells did that for us here, and then a $320 million fund plus $75 million here in Newfoundland to lower emissions and to keep workers here doing the work that they do as we get to those places that we will get, I believe, very shortly in lowering emissions in the oil and gas sector, and frankly, throughout. I mean, I think the potential, for instance, on hydrogen and wind power here in Newfoundland are huge. But while we're waiting for those opportunities to present themselves in tangible ways, and I think that they will in the next year or two, we just need to keep people here. I need them. We need them.
Hey, I had Tom Marshall on the show, the former premier of Newfoundland and Labrador.
I know, Tom.
And he talked to me about a national energy grid, which he said would solve Canada's need for electricity in the grid and solve Newfoundland's economic issues. He thought that Newfoundland and Labrador could power Canada if there was a national energy grid.
We are already looking at certain amounts of that. First of all, tangibly, we're going to be building the Atlantic Loop. And that will, I think, alleviate about 3 megatons a year. It's basically low-hanging fruit. What this is basically getting primarily Nova Scotia, but also New Brunswick off of coal. And so it just means getting more power from Newfoundland, from Labrador particularly, and from Quebec, and to swing it into the maritime provinces. It won't make Newfoundland rich. I don't even think it'll make Quebec rich. This is all a play to get those provinces off of coal. We are also looking at similar things. We're doing studies. My department's doing it. Looking at Manitoba and Saskatchewan and BC and Alberta. Are there areas that we could do that? That is the makings of a national electricity grid, no question. If you read, I read Dave Roberts all the time on Twitter, Dr. Volts, and he's big on electrification. Electrification is huge. The more that we can electrify, the better. Electricity is something that we do. It is something in Canada we are very good at. Whether it be primarily in British Columbia, but also Ontario, Quebec, and Labrador. If we can provide more electricity to the United States as well, that will certainly help them out. We're very good at this, and we need more of it. So I think Tom's onto something. I mean, if we can find more market for Muskrat Falls power, particularly, all the better. But we have a lot of electricity. We need to generate more of it. Hydroelectricity is something, as I say, Canada is very good at, and it's something that I'm just looking over a book I keep on my desk here. Jim Prentice, Triple Crown, and it's something that Jim talked about an awful lot too. I keep that on my desk because I've always looked up to Jim. Still can't believe I have to talk about him in the past tense. But the book is Triple Crown, Canada's winning Canada's energy future. Because Jim, I think, had very similar passions to me in Indigenous rights and in reconciliation, in the environment and in energy, and how those three come together and the nuance of that. If for people who are interested in that, get that book because he writes extremely well about that. But he focuses a lot on electrification. And by the way, I should mention, I got to know Jim, just to come back to CTV. I got to know Jim because people may not know this about Jim, but a huge music fan. And it was odd because I would show up at Canadian Idol.
You know that about?
I would show up at Canadian Idol. It was out of duty. You had to as a CTV employee, and because the loser would always come on the next day, so I'd like to see the performance. But also, frankly, I enjoyed it. I loved Canadian Idol. I loved watching it, and I loved how it showcased talent from across the country. But there in the front row, there's Jim Prentice. So, I went over and talked to him, and he showed up whenever he was in Toronto. He always asked if he could come, and he would show up at Canadian Idol every season, whenever he was in town. And then he started showing up at Juno's wherever they were in the country. And Juno, I hosted a couple of them, and I always went. But having a beer and going over in a corner and talking to Jim Prentice about Indigenous, about reconciliation, about the environment, about the energy, I'll never forget it because it was fine. We developed somewhat of a friendship. Anyway, piece of trivia about Jim that many people may not know. He was a terrific guy, and one of those guys who was in politics for all the right reasons.
Thanks for sharing that. That's a gem. Do I have a hard stop with you in 1 minute?
No.
Okay. Got a couple more things.
Yeah.
I've been a fan of nuclear energy as a way out of our climate change challenge for a long time. Until you became the Minister of Natural Resources, the words nuclear energy did not cross the lips of anybody from the Government of Canada. You talk about it all the time.
Yeah.
Where does your interest in this come from? And is this a genuine policy shift on the part of the government?
Zero emission. Zero emission. It is
any way you can get there, right?
Any way you can get there. There is no panacea for this. There is no panacea for this. There is no, if we just had more solar panels. No. Solar panels figure into it. Wind figures into it. Electrification figures into it. Hydro, all of this stuff. And by the way, there are consequences to every single one of these actions, to be very, very clear, right? Every single wind turbine takes 60,000 pounds of copper. There are consequences to every environmental consequences to every energy decision that we make. It is that simple. It is simply a matter of weighing them. I mean, I am amazed by the number of people who crap on me for supporting the mining industry. How the hell do you think we're going to build the batteries? How the heck do you think we're going to get to the electric vehicles? How do you think these things are built? I mean, if you grow up, as I did, either, on an island in the middle of the North Atlantic or in the subarctic in Labrador, you grow up to be a very pragmatic person. You are blindly and ideologically practical. And that is where I come from on nuclear. So I know what the waste issue is here. And I know it is tangible. We can see it. We know what it is. We can mitigate it. We have the science. We have the ability, right? It's far more distant when it comes to, the inevitable pollution that may occur from even renewables, but certainly with oil and gas, the carbon that we've been putting into the air for years without consequence or without a price, right? But nuclear, it's always been known. We know how to manage it. It is zero emission. It's something that we are extremely good at in Canada. So why we would, squash that competitive advantage is beyond me. CANDU reactors are still the gold standard around the world. We are a tier 1 nuclear nation. And for people who give red tape a bad name, actually red tape is a bad name because it's bad regulatory policy, but we have an excellent regulatory regime around nuclear. It is actually a competitive strength for us. So we would be foolhardy to put that to one side. It is a part of it. I don't look to nuclear as a panacea. I don't look to anything as a panacea. I don't believe in panaceas. It will be a mix of things. But nuclear gives us that stability that Ontario has enjoyed in this country more than any other province for decades now. And you're seeing significant investments in Darlington and Bruce Power's putting significant investments in. We need more of it. And the idea of small modular reactors is it just allows for, greater versatility and greater deployment. It would allow us to use it in different ways. We would be foolhardy not to look at it. It is not a 2030 play. It is a 2050 play. But you got to lay the seeds for that now. You got to do the R&D now. The Americans are on it. Even, right through Trump, they were on this. I don't want to give up that competitive advantage. I don't understand other jurisdictions that have given it up. Germany particularly. I mean, Germany increased its coal extraction after they decided to shut down nuclear plants.
Because of Fukushima.
That's not clear-eyed thinking on lowering emissions. I'm sorry. So, I am, daringly and ambitiously clear-eyed about this stuff, ambitiously practical.
Well, you should know that those investments in nuclear in Ontario are supported by 70 to 75% of Ontario people. The acceptance of nuclear as a source of electricity in Ontario is really, people have some post-Chernobyl 3 Mile Island view that nuclear is unpopular. It is actually not. With people. And David, I remember living in Toronto in the early 2000s, and I was dumbstruck by the amount of smog. Paris is actually a lot smoggier than you think, and I lived there for a year, but I couldn't believe Toronto. And everyone would say, "Oh, it's from the States." It wasn't from the States. As soon as Dalton McGuinty shut down those coal plants, suddenly we had fresh air in Toronto. It happened. Yeah. It was dramatic.
a significant legacy of his, I think.
What a great policy decision.
Oh, what a great policy decision. What a great policy decision. So we want to do the same for coal in the Maritimes. Saskatchewan and Alberta still rely too much on coal. But, they know that, and we're going to work with them to reduce it. It's also one of the reasons why, again, another medium long-term play for them. They are big advocates of SMRs and of nuclear because, they see that as being able to help them as well.
Right. Can I shift gears pretty dramatically?
Sure.
A couple of weeks ago, there was a bill banning conversion therapy in the House of Commons. And a significant number of Conservatives in the House of Commons voted against that bill banning conversion therapy. Mm-hmm. You felt strongly enough about that to tweet about it, make comments. Tell me how you feel about that issue.
Controlling your Irish temper. I was actually quite taken aback by how viscerally I reacted to watching 62 of them stand up. It is to imply that who I am is wrong, and it took me a long time to figure out who I am, David. I was late coming out. 36. Through certainly no fault of my environment or my family, who were all incredibly supportive and frankly hugely relieved when I came out. It was myself. I had just tucked that away, and it was extremely, it was damaging. It was damaging to me. It is something, frankly, it's something I didn't fully deal with until I dealt with my drinking. And the drinking really was I didn't realize until I went to therapy, actually. I thought I was all good with it, but it was a holdover from years of closeting myself. To imply that who I am is something, if I just did enough therapy, I could be converted from. It's my marriage. Don't touch my marriage.
Right.
How do you think people who are gay or lesbian, any member of the LGBTQ plus community, how do you think they are going to react to that vote? Like, I understand the politics, and I mean, look, I get that, hey, the Liberals put it up for this reason, and it's diversion, and blah blah blah, and and the Senate's holding it up for that, but it's all very good reasons, and we don't want clergy to not be able to talk. That is all horse shit at the end of the day. How do you think people like me will react to that? I think John Ibbotson put it very well. Look, if people my age, your age, of consenting age, decide that they feel for whatever reason that this is something that if they take therapy, they can get out of. Well, look, I'm not getting in the way of consenting adults, deciding to making that decision. But we are talking children here. I cannot imagine the psychological abuse of your community forcing that upon you. And you have to understand, in these communities, it is utterly enveloping. So I was much angrier about it than I thought, and I'm not sure how I will deal with people who voted that way. It's all well and good to say, oh, we will have that conversation. They can initiate that conversation. Right. It is not for me to initiate. This is who I am. I fought for this. I fought hard for this. I fought hard for this happiness in a very public way. But I'm happy. Good news is, when I met my husband, I went, okay, so this is no longer a question of ambiguity. This is it. Right. And we have been happily married through a pandemic, living together for 11 years. So for anyway,
Excellent. Well, that will test even the best
you allowed me a moment, David. I am happy with where I am. I am happy overall. We have won this battle. We won this battle. And, but I do believe in vigilance. I do believe that you got to defend, that rights are bequeathed. And in my lifetime and in my life, I have known what it is to not have those rights. And I have known what it is to have those rights. I know what it is to not be happy, and I know what it is to be happy. And I will defend that happiness, and I will defend it for others.
It's very powerful, Seamus. I just would like to follow up a bit because both the policy around gay rights and the attitudes about it have moved pretty rapidly, in my view, in Canadian society.
Around the world, person. David, in Ireland, 75% of the population voted for gay marriage because they have to do a referendum in order to change the constitution. So, we didn't actually vote on it. And I'd like to think in Canada, if we voted on it, it would be somewhere around 75. But in Ireland, they went, and they voted 75%. It's amazing. It is the greatest civil rights triumph of our lifetime, and it happened before our eyes. It's amazing.
Yeah, because in my adult lifetime, I worked on something in a Liberal government called the Defense of Marriage Act.
Thank you. Yes.
Right? No, not the one you would thank me for.
Oh.
One that defined
the other one.
Before we were running against Stockwell Day.
Yeah.
Before we ran against Stockwell Day in 2000, we brought in a law that defined marriage as between a man and a woman. Right? So that's what's happened. Yes. Over a period of time. But my question to you is, so for those of us who aren't gay, it's tempting to look at that and say, my God, they have achieved full equality. Have you?
No. Not by any means. No. But I think we got a really good shot at it. I look at kids today and it is just amazing. It's just amazing. I'm just so chuffed about it, by the openness. Yesterday was Pride Day in Nain, Labrador. Nain, Labrador. I know Nain. It is the northernmost community in Labrador, and somebody sent it to me last night, and I had tears in my eyes. It was every time I see a rainbow crosswalk, I just never in my life. And I see not just kids benefiting from it, but continuing to fight for it and champion it. And they go, there's no coming out for them. There just is. And the fluidity of it, and even dealing with trans rights and all of it is just amazing to me. It's just amazing. And so, you look at the kids are all right. We'll be all right.
Cool. I'm going to have to let you go. You're a minister. You need to go around the country. But I do have to ask you before you leave.
Yeah.
For two questions. First of all, what's the election going to be about? What's the question before voters?
I think the question before voters is, as we come out of this pandemic, who's best able to lead? And I think that we have huge challenges coming out of this pandemic. I think we put it forward that we want to build back better, and I think that's what we'll put before Canadians when the time comes. I am, and to come back to the idea of energy in the economy and getting that balance right. I know that we are the party that is best able to do that, and I know that is synonymous again with the prosperity of this country and the prosperity of families in this country. I believe, because I'm on the front lines of it, that we are getting that right. We continue to tweak and we continue to adjust and we continue to make those adjustments and to make sure that the entire country is represented, to make sure that nobody is left behind, and to make sure that those who will lead us through this. It is a significant transition that, taking that shipping container that oil tanker and moving it. We're the best ones to helm that ship. I believe that. And so I'm ready for that. I'm ready for that argument.
Excellent. Okay, my last question is, you have any tips for me as an interviewer? What am I doing wrong? What should I do better?
I didn't know what the heck I was doing. That's the thing. I wasn't trained. It was the moose. If it wasn't for the moose and my brother, none of this would have happened. So, here's what was interesting, and I think you're already well ahead of it. When I showed up on Talk TV, and they were like, you be you, just be you, and all the execs just sat there and look at this just happened. And as soon as the camera came on, I went, "Hi, welcome to the chat room. I'm Seamus ORegan." And I sounded like Troy McClure in The Simpsons. and they went, they were like, well, "What's that? What are you doing? What are you doing? What are you doing?" And we wanted someone fresh. We didn't want somebody who had spray, they called it, that you just sound like everyone on TV. And I said, I didn't say it at the time. It took a while for me to realize that I may not have been on television, but I've been absorbing it since I was my whole life. And that's how people talked. And it's so, you be you. You are the same guy I used to interview. You just keep, you be you. Just don't go changing. The only way I believe it works, and the only way they
do not quote Billy Joel on this show. Do not quote Billy Joel on this show.
Man of the people. He's made some, he made some bad decisions on music rights, but goddamn, he's a man of the people. Don't go change it. That's the thing. I don't think that if you want to have longevity in media, you got to be yourself. I believe anyway. Yeah, that's the turf you got to own. Otherwise, you can be disposable, and you can just find somebody else who talks like this. And I think that learning that lesson very early on in my media career was extremely helpful. But I tell you what, it took me a while to get back to being comfortable enough to just being me on TV. And then by the time I would say my first year or two on Canada AM, I just went back to being me, and it's liberating. So keep at it, keep doing it. This is great. And just being able in a long form interview to be able to talk, I think is just, it's a luxury these days. So I appreciate it. Thank you.
I appreciate you coming on so much. This was a shitload of fun, and you gave us a lot to think about.
Thank you. Thanks. So, I appreciate it.
Thank you very much, and good luck on the hustings. We'll be thinking of you.
Thanks, David. Thanks very much.
Thanks. Bye. For our sponsor, CN, safety is the prime directive. We've talked about it here before. CN employees live by strict safety protocols, and the company encourages everyone to talk about safety all the time. Because if you're talking about it, you're aware of it. Well, CN would like to make an urgent safety suggestion to everyone. Get vaccinated. Right now. Nothing is more important to the collective safety of Canadians. What's been accomplished so far is pretty impressive. Close to 80% of eligible Canadians have been jabbed once, and more than half of us over age 12 are fully vaccinated. That makes Canada a world leader in vaccines. But there are still more than 6 million eligible Canadians who remain unvaccinated. Some are held back by medical conditions. Others have chosen to forego vaccination or postpone it. Meanwhile, the Delta variant of COVID is surging worldwide, and the majority of those who are seriously ill or dying from it are unvaccinated. That includes children under the age of 12 who are not yet eligible for vaccines. They deserve our protection, and the best way to protect them is to accept vaccination. In recent weeks, our political leaders and public health professionals have been practically begging Canadians to get vaccinated. CN wants to add its voice to theirs. Vaccination is rooted in rock-solid medical science, and its benefits are manifestly clear. The conspiracy theories about vaccines are just that. Vaccination is not a political issue. It's a matter of life and death, and taking collective responsibility for public health. Get vaccinated. Please. It's the only path back to normal for all of us. All right, kids out in Herle Burly land, if it's Tuesday morning, it's time for the political panel with Scott Reid and Jenni Byrne. Jenni is currently joining us from a back alley somewhere. How are you? What's going on?
Well, no, I'm actually joining from Lindsay, and there's actually a very nice backdrop, but I forgot to plug my computer in last night. So So for me to be able to do it, I'm plugged. I have to use the back wall of my grandmother's house to be able to plug in and do the podcast, David. Or I'd be done after 15 minutes.
I'm familiar with houses. I invite them to join the pod. It will be fun.
I'm familiar with houses of that vintage. Was there no plug-in in the carport? You couldn't fit in there?
No. There is not something in the carport.
I miss a good carport. Garages back then. Garages were for the fabulously rich, the ridiculous rich, right? We had a carport. Who needs walls?
Oh, you okay, Jenny? You had a good week since we last saw you?
I'm doing great. As long as I stay out of the city of Toronto, I feel like I'm in a good mood. When I'm in Toronto, I'm in less good mood. I'll be in a better mood when we can do the podcast in person. That will make me come back to Toronto.
Yes, that will be fun. Scott, I presume you had your normal eventful week.
I had a bad week. I'm in a real dark place. I mentioned this. Don't laugh, David. Don't laugh at my anguish. Maybe, mental health isn't...
I'm trying to laugh at somebody else's jokes besides my own.
Oh.
Somebody on the iPad iTunes machine said that I laugh harder at my own jokes than anybody in whatever. So I'm laughing at your jokes now. Go ahead. You're sad. You've had a bad week.
I've had a bad week. I took Jenny's advice. I got out of the city the other day, went to the cottage, visited with my mother, and this is a tragic event. So just sit back. I'm going to have to talk about this for a while. I got to work some things out. And I was on the dock and I was, I'm getting to the age where, I have to be very careful about my movements. I'm not that predictable. And boof, I went over and in went me and my BlackBerry, my phone. And I still have a BlackBerry. And so my phone was submerged in the water. And then I'm scrambling around, trying to get it. It's under the dock, but all the sand's kicked up and I can't see. And anyway, I eventually get it out and it's done for. And so I had to
Did you put it in rice?
I did, but...
Did you put it in rice?
I did.
Yeah.
I did. And it came modestly back to life, but kind of sad, sort of like RoboCop alive. It's like, Murphy, kill me. It's like blinking and the keys don't work. And so it wasn't a full and happy life that it had left to it. So I had to bury my longtime friend, the BlackBerry. And this is the passing on.
What do you do then? Call Lazaritas?
Well, I
call Lazaritas.
No, I made the
Ask
move.
him for another one?
I went to so after 20 years, I no longer possess a BlackBerry, and I'll no longer have people walking up to me in bars and saying, "Could you let us know what's happening in season 1 of Grey's Anatomy?" I will no longer get all the jokes about whether I can call 2005. But I'm very sad. I don't like the new phone. It isn't a BlackBerry. It isn't just the keyboard. The device was great, but I have to acknowledge it. It's time to move on. So I've abandoned the BlackBerry, and it saw me through one marriage, about 5 careers, the birth of 4 sons, a very testy 3-way exchange between me and Scott Feschuk and William Shatner, and. But that's it. It's I'm done for. I'm done for on BlackBerry. And I was thinking, Jenny, do you remember? You guys must have had this when you first came into office. One of the saddest, sweetest memories I have is remember when you used to go to people and say, "Well, what's your PIN?" Because your BlackBerry would have a PIN.
Yes.
And you'd be like, "Fuck all you fuckers who's trying to track me on A-Tip. You'll never know a damn thing. I've got the PIN. I'm going pin to pin. And
I would love it when
saying secret shit, big government stuff, photographs of myself like Jamie Summers, all half dressed. I've got everything on the PIN and you can't track it."
No, the PIN was great. And I used to love going email to PIN. So someone would send you an email and you'd forward it along as a PIN. I loved doing that.
You're a fucking pro. It was killer. All those things.
Turns out pins were recoverable, by the way.
Yeah.
Well,
Yeah.
I was reading through the
Scott,
BlackBerry
what's
blog.
next? What's next? How much do you think? What's next? How much you think you can get for your Betamax machine?
You know, my mother still has a VCR. My mother still has a VHS VCR, and she's still pissed off that you can't get beta tapes because she felt that the quality of the beta VCR was much greater. She'll still tape soap operas.
Everybody agreed.
She tapes soap operas in the afternoon and then watches them late at night on her VHS. I'll tell you.
Brilliant.
My household, it's a time warp.
I know that people want to hear us talk about politics. And as I say this, I hear people hitting the more button, the fast forward button on their things. But just quickly, go around. Jenny, Carey Price going to Seattle or not?
I don't think so, but I think that I think the option is there. His wife's family is from outside of Seattle. He's kind of a Northwest, West Coast boy. And if I was Ron Francis, I would get Price and I'd build a team around it. Although I did see someone tweet out like a picture that they said Mark Bergevin sent a picture of basically a guy in a full body cast to Ron Francis and said, "This currently is Carey Price."
Did you feel maybe? Yeah, no, I don't think so. And the reason I don't think so, like I think there's a persuasive case for Seattle to do it. Like, I mean, but you would have to plan your whole franchise around it. And so unless they've been in talks quietly for months, and maybe they have been, but to me, it's not something you can call an audible on because you can't suddenly go, oh, you know what? We're now gonna pick up that contract. So you would have to make an active decision that the center of your expansion franchise is going to be Carey Price and his big contract. He's going to sell your tickets. He's going to sell your jersey. Everything else is a satellite around that financially and otherwise. And so I don't think that's happened. I think this kind of like came upon us. I think the Bergevin thought they're not going to take him. I want to protect Allen. This makes sense. Nobody will want that contract. And even if he bets wrong, I think he sort of says to himself, I can live with Carey. I mean, it's heartbreaking, but I can live with Carey and that big contract leaving town. So I think it's a calculated risk, probably a smart calculated risk, but it sure would crush my son Ben if Carey Price left Montreal. Like crush him.
Yeah. What do you think, David?
I mean, I think that I like it. And frankly, I hope they take him. If I was them, I would take him, and I hope they take him. Because anybody that looks at the Montreal Canadiens and says that's a team that's going to be back in the Stanley Cup final next year is on some heavy drugs. They're not close to good enough as they're currently constituted. And I would like to see them have $30 million of cap space to go out and improve that team. So I'm fine with it. On to politics.
Woo!
On to politics. There's an election in Nova Scotia. We've been calling for an election here. We've been desperate for an election on this pod. We've been calling for somebody to call an election. And finally, Ian Rankin heard us and called an election out in Nova Scotia. Jenny, what are you hearing?
Well, what I'm hearing, and I talked to some friends from out east. Rankin's in a good position. He's in a even better position because the NDP that has traditionally been more of the ilk of Roy Romano or kind of in the center have really gone left. So they're really only competitive in Halifax seats. It's not kind of the Darrell Dexter election that he picked up some rural seats. So I think that turnout's going to be low. It was only 53% in 2017 in their last election. So I think that helps the incumbent Liberal government. I think it's going to have a 2-day overlap of the if the feds don't call the election early, if they don't listen to us and they stay on their current timeline, then there'll be an overlap. So Rankin needs to get 28 seats to get his majority because Nova Scotia's gone from 51 up to 55 seats, and 22 of those seats are in Halifax, which I think looks very, very good for them. I think that Tim Houston and his team will run a good campaign, though. Tim's like he's a skilled politician. He's a nice guy. He's extremely hardworking. So I think that, I think he will do well, but I think that it's still the Liberals to lose.
How do you know him?
Tim? Well, I spent a lot of time out east. I've met him several times at different political conventions and events. When we were on the road in 2015 for the federal campaign in his area in Pictou County, he was he was at the event. So I've met him through politics. I won't say I'm extremely close with him, but I've our paths have crossed over the last several years. He's been elected, I think, since the 2013 campaign.
Right. Well, one of the things one of the things that's going to be interesting is how the NDP, because the NDP look like they're running a mini version of what the federal NDP campaign will be. Very I don't want to call it aspirational. It's a big package. They've got a big vision document for 10 years, and it is a Build Back Better document. There's no question about it. And so it feels to me like what the NDP are going to be running on federally, which is we're left to the Liberals and we'll push the Liberals to do the kind of stuff you want. So it'll be interesting to see how it plays out. I also think the overlap with the federal helps the provincial Liberals. I think that the last 2 days of federal campaign will give them a boost and a kick at the end, because the way the federal campaign is likely to start, at least in Atlantic Canada. Scott, what do you think?
Well, you guys know the political landscape there better than I do. Particularly, I know you, David, have helped run campaigns down there. I'm intrigued by that NDP Liberal dynamic.
I am not. If I could just declare, I am not involved in this campaign. Just so you know, I'm not. But I have, was involved in McNeil's campaign.
Right.
Yeah.
And yes, and we're aware that Rankin explicitly said, I don't want Herle anywhere near me. So his fortunes do look bright. I don't know what to make of it. The thing that I'm most interested in is on the other side of the political spectrum, and not so much even partisan in the party, how it manifests. But I'm interested to see if we find that the duration of the campaign, the issue set starts to change in any ways that will provide clues for the federal campaign. So even in Nova Scotia, do we see people start to say, yeah, no, I hear Build Back Better. I get all that. I know we want to, we want to make certain that we build gigantic things that last for a long time. But I'm a little bit anxious about where the dollars and cents are. I'm a little bit anxious about what's going to happen to my kids. I'm anxious about housing and the affordability of it. I'm anxious, and I'm reciting the same point I keep making every week. But I'll just be interested to see if some of that kind of bread and butter, kitchen table economics issues start to emerge, and we find that the center of the discussion shifts slightly. Because if it does in Nova Scotia, then it for sure as hell will in the rest of the country. And that has some implications in terms of how the federal campaign will unfold. So my guess is you're right. Like that dynamic between the Liberals and the NDP and all of that will probably have a lot to do with how the seat count unfolds. But I'll be interested to watch how the discussion unfolds and see if it has big time implications in terms of the economic discussion we might be in for coming a federal campaign.
I'll also be interested to see whether the Conservatives can get anything going. They have a new leader. He's probably not very well known, and so this is his chance to get known. But Rankin is, clearly running to the left of where McNeil ran.
Yeah.
McNeil was a pretty small C liberal, or a blue liberal, as people used to call them. And Rankin is more in line with the progressive nature of the current modern Liberal Party. And so that should theoretically, at least, Jenny, give Houston and the PCs some space.
Yeah, hopefully it will. We haven't seen much in terms of policy. I don't think that's kind of come out yet. It's been the calling of the campaign, and then a lot of whistle stops visiting candidates and nailing in some lawn signs. So hopefully it will give that will give a bit of a boost to Houston in terms of probably even picking up some of the rural seats that they currently don't have. But I think that the battles will be between the NDP and the Liberals for the most part in Halifax. It's like the Toronto of Ontario. It's 22 of the 55 seats. So it's such a big, like HRM is such a big geographic area, I think you'll see Rankin spend a lot of time there.
Can I ask you guys both a question?
The polls do show though that they have flipped things in Cape Breton, and that the Liberals are back in the game in Cape Breton, which is where a bigger majority for them than McNeil got would come from, because Cape Breton had turned on them.
The Tories lost some good incumbents in Cape Breton. They decided they ran federally in 2019, Eddie Orrell and Elfie McLeod. So they don't have kind of those. It really is more of a localized campaign in Cape Breton. And the NDP have a seat there, kind of in industrial Cape Breton, and they'll probably, from what I've been told by people there, they'll probably keep that seat.
So is this
Scott, can I put something to you just before you start? Can I put something to you? The Conservatives are sort of taking your tack, if I would say, in an interesting way. The Nova Scotia Conservatives have not bitten on the austerity alternative to Rankin. They're not running on, we've got to balance the budget faster or cut spending, anything like that. On the contrary, they're running on healthcare. And I presume they're actually trying to make the contrast that you are talking about, which is Rankin is off there talking about climate change and equity issues in society and all that. And what Houston is saying is our healthcare system sucks, our hospitals suck. And we need to put money into that, even if it means running a higher deficit. That's a really interesting tack for a Conservative party to take, to try to make themselves the healthcare party in the election.
It is interesting. We'll see if people will buy it. I mean, I like the argumentation. I like the logic of saying, look, if we're going to find ourselves this deep in Hawk, because we had to be, well, then at least going forward, we're going to stay this deep in Hawk for the things that matter absolutely most. Not for the things that are your pet project designs about how you'd like to expand, the reach of the state. I sound like Margaret Thatcher all of a sudden, but for the things that are established, like let's make sure the things that we rely upon are working as well as possible before we start building out new things. And if we're going to be in deficit, then let's make damn sure that we've at least got that right. Like I think there's now how much that translates to the whole country is another question, but there's still an underlying logic there about watch these guys. The question I wanted to ask you two was: is Rankin and this new Liberal government, are they seen as a continuation of the same Liberal government that you've elected and you feel comfortable with, and that's a good thing for Rankin? Or are they seen more as the first Rankin government, which is moving a little bit to the left, is a little bit younger, a little bit more activist, and that's a good thing because it's maybe going to help him block off any NDP surge? Like, is there...
I don't know. Nova Scotia's, though, not like New Brunswick. Like New Brunswick has a history of electing very young, 30-some, like Bernard Lorge, Sean Graham, Brian Gallant, Nova
Camille
Scotia.
Theriault.
Yeah.
Going back in time, yeah.
Camille Theriault.
Nova Scotia doesn't really have that. So I'm not sure. Like McNeil was very, very popular out there, even among conservative voters. You would hear it. Well, he's a good, rural guy. Like big family, small business owner. So I'm not sure whether if I'm the Liberals, I want to run too much on your latter proposition, Scott. David, you might have a different opinion, but I'm not sure you want to do much of a change. You actually kind of want to. If I were them, I'd want to hug McNeil as much as possible.
Yeah, I think I think the positioning is more the latter. I think it's seen as similar government, but perhaps with new energy and a little bit more focus on some of the issues that animate the progressive wing of the province. But I don't think they're trying to affect a wholesale change in identity of the government. And they certainly have not abandoned fiscal responsibility. They've got a 4-year plan, a 4-year deficit elimination track, which is more aggressive than the Conservative deficit elimination track.
Yeah.
Let's flip to the other side of the country. And as we like to say in Saskatchewan, talk about the other one, Manitoba. What's going on, Jenni? What's going on with Pallister? A year ago, he had a significant lead in the polls, like everybody in Canada did, and he looked like he was going to be cruising to re-election. And now he's literally facing what looks like a full-scale revolt.
Yeah, well, they were a little behind the rest of the country also in terms of dealing with COVID. They were they really didn't get a first wave until the rest of the country was getting their second wave. But yeah, he's in a lot of trouble with his caucus. He's lost 2 cabinet ministers in the last week. I'm hearing that there's more unrest within caucus. Once caucus turns, they turn pretty quick. So I've also heard from people that Pallister isn't as upset about it as one would be. We haven't seen him apologize. We haven't seen him make any efforts to try to stem the flow of unhappiness within his party, and that he's more looking just for an opportunity to be able to go on his own terms. There's a lot of people saying there's like almost a 0% chance that Pallister will lead the party in the next election. He liked his life prior. COVID and being premier has put a bit of a cramp on him being able to visit his second home in Costa Rica, and that he's a bit. There's a lot of speculation out of Manitoba that he's a little bit over being premier.
Yeah, it kind of looks it, because you're right. He hasn't really done anything proactive to stem this. Scott, Pallister's been in politics since the 90s. Pallister's been in politics since the 90s. And so when somebody that experienced goes out and says something like, the people who founded the residential schools were well-meaning and well-intentioned, you know what you're doing.
Yeah.
You're making a statement deliberately.
I think that's right.
I think gaffe.
Not a gaffe, but he may have underestimated the ferocity of the pushback. He may have, even with all that experience, he may have thought that he may be sitting around thinking that he hears that from a lot of people he knows, and he thought therefore that would be a generalized opinion and would cause him less pain. I don't know. I've never been able to figure Pallister out. I'm like, we're going to where Jenni's at, and I don't want to pretend that I've studied the guy microscopically, but he's a peculiar politician in that he's run for leaderships, he's left and become a premier, but on the other hand, he doesn't appear to really fucking care about anything. Like, it's kind of like you get the sense that he wants to get to Costa Rica. It's like, I want to be in power. I want to be the leader. I'd like to be prime minister. I'd like to be premier, but I also want to watch my shows. So, like, come on, like, everybody.
It's 4:30. The water bar is on. Hold my fucking calls.
It's like, I don't know. Like, me and my wife, we play euchre on Tuesdays. Get off my fucking back. And so I don't know. He's an odd guy to read. Like, he does, like, you look at it objectively, you say he has a service record that indicates that politics is his life and what he does, and he's obviously committed to it. On the other hand, he gives off this genuine demeanor of, like, I am just marking time here. I can't wait to go indulge my rest of my calendar in leisure time. So I don't understand the guy. He may be the exception to our general rule, David, you and I subscribe to at least, which is these people tend to be carried out on their shield. Like, he doesn't even look like he's troubled by this seeming revolt. It's kind of like, yeah, whatever, right? If they get me, they get me. Oh, what's the worst thing that happens? I don't have to fucking put up with them anymore. Hey, I kind of hope I lose. So I don't know. It seems he's just a peculiar cat.
But that's why it's also not a gaffe. He would have apologized. A gaffe is a fuck up. A gaffe is you go out and say, I'm sorry, I was misquoted, I was wrong, whatever the whole thing is. He hasn't done any of that, and it seemingly has done nothing behind the scenes to fix it either. But he's a guy also he's, to your point, he was elected provincially, ran for leader federally, then ran federally after the Alliance and the PC party merged, and he got one of the crowning moments that for Pallister was the committee where David Dingwall talked about he was entitled to his entitlements for his $1.50 pack of gum. But he got a lot of credit having watched that committee, having been an opposition staffer.
What a day that was. Jesus fuck me, what a day that was. I am entitled to my entitlements. He thought he just won that exchange. Ugh.
But it wasn't actually, Pallister got credit for it, but it was actually Broadbent. It was Broadbent's questioning that like needled him in terms of the actual committee. So anyways, I agree with you. He's an interesting guy to watch, but I don't think he's going to be, probably by the end of this year, he won't be premier of Manitoba, and he'll probably just kind of walk out, walk to the airport, get on a plane and bye. Like,
what did you think
bye,
of Wab
guys.
Canoe's? What did you think of Wab Canoe's play about crashing the Indigenous Affairs Minister's news conference?
Well, it got a lot of it got a lot of coverage. It was, well, what do you do if you're the new Indigenous Affairs Minister? Like there was nothing he could. There was absolutely nothing he could do. You're a member of the government. You're standing outside at a press conference. Like he completely, like Canoe basically took over the entire, like sucked every bit of oxygen out of that press conference.
I almost look at it and say, what do you do if you're Wab Canoe? Like, I'm not sure that any of that was planned. It was, I think it was a spontaneous.
Well, he was there.
He was there. But it's but that's not that odd.
It had to be planned in some regard.
But he didn't know that he would say that. He was like, I'm going to go there with a flip-to book. If the minister says something outrageous, I'll jump in and interrupt. Like, I would just say to people that the idea that you would intrude upon, even if you're like a, hardcore politician, you're looking for profile and looking for action, and if you feel very strongly about the issue, it's very, like, standing there and going, all right, I've decided I'm going to improvise and interrupt and intrude on this news conference. It's an unusual thing to do. It is even within the boundaries of, like, it's just impolitic and it feels impolite, and it's an extraordinary decision.
Bless you, Jenny.
Bless
Thank
you.
So
I thought it was, I would see it had an enormous effect. And it was obviously the biggest moment of Wab Canoe's political career. But I thought it was, I thought it was pretty extraordinary because maybe I'm being
gutsy,
naive.
bold move, Because if it backfires, it could end you.
I thought it was a gutsy, bold move, and my guess is that it was something that he had to make the split-second decision to say, I got to do this unusual thing. I have to employ this unusual tactic. And as you say, like, he could have looked like an asshole. He could have looked like a gate crasher and looked small. That's right, and it didn't. He read the moment right, and he seized the moment. But it's not as simple as people think. Like it was, you just couldn't. It'd be very difficult to plan that because you don't know exactly how it's going to unfold.
Yeah. All right, we have mailbag questions today.
Woo!
Today's mailbag day. So let's start with this one. From, and I don't know how to pronounce your name, Zavi or Zavi. I'm going to say Zavi. Zavie. Writes in to say, what's a sign that Team Trudeau or any other incumbent government, say one that was in power from 2006 to 2015, what's a sign that Team Trudeau or any other incumbent government is tired? Is this a real thing or just a narrative the opposition talk about?
Well, I think it's a real thing. I think it's a lot of it is just time. I think that we've seen the last two governments before this one. It's essentially been 10 years. I think that you guys suffered not only the fact that we merged the parties, but Chrétien had been in power for 10 years before you guys took the reins. I think that there's just a certain shelf life on governments, and I don't know about you guys, but I know from the start of government to the end, you become less nimble. You become, as an organization, you become a lot less political. It becomes more about governing as opposed to thinking anything. The party starts to become an afterthought, and that really wasn't the case. I shouldn't say that because that wasn't the case with us. Like there was always a tremendous resources within the party. I went back and forth twice between the PMO and the party, but it becomes more, the longer you're there, the more your relationship with the bureaucrats, the more you become a functioning governing, like it becomes governing, and that becomes more of the focus as opposed to being nimble. And I think that every government, I think regardless of the political stripes, I think that every government becomes that way. And there's anomalies. You've got, Alberta, like the PC government in Alberta, the Socreds before that. Like you have governments that like stay in power longer, but I think it seems to be kind of the 10 years. That's when people grow tired of seeing your face, so to speak.
That it's so interesting about the how you switch once you get into office, because pretty much, most parties that come into government, their platform was the process of extensive consultation with riding associations across the country and with stakeholders across the country. And they traveled and met people and tried to involve as many people as they could in their platform development process. And then you win. And from then on, your platforms are largely generated by the bureaucracy. You never go through that exercise again of that broad, because you can't blue sky with people and you're too busy.
Yeah, my answer to that question is what you guys are saying. It's a variation on it. A government is tired when they literally get governmentitis. And what I mean by governmentitis is that culture shift from we want to take power and we've figured out the meeting place between how to win and how to campaign to win and the things that we want to do if we win, that gets intruded upon more and more and more by the passing of time by events, so I have to respond to this as a government. We have to do that. Then the machinery of government causes you to, so then weird little things start to happen. Like ministers' offices are staffed more and more by more and more people who have not necessarily come up through the party, who have not necessarily come up through the political chain. So you've got political assistants who aren't necessarily political. And the portion of them, and you should always have some of that, there should be some balance and tension, but the share of them in offices starts to grow. The number one signal in my mind to watch is when, and this happens, and I've seen it happen, David, you've seen it happen, is when senior bureaucrats and I'm not saying that like they're evil. You want to work with a senior civil service. I have lots of respect for the civil service. But what happens is there's a gradual thing that occurs over time. Jenni says, take a decade. And suddenly what you'll find is that the people who are the primary advisors to the prime minister stop becoming their political advisors and start becoming those senior bureaucrats. And you'll see that suddenly the bureaucrats aren't just providing the public policy advice, but at some point they cross over and they start providing the political advice also. They start to take up more and more space in the room. And that morning meeting with the prime minister at 8 or 8:15 or 8:30, whatever it is in the culture of an individual government, that increasingly it's dominated less by the chief of staff or the principal secretary and more by the clerk. And I've watched that happen, and I've watched some clerks.
You're not speaking personally, are you, Scott?
No, you know what? It's less about us. We were trapped in a long-time government, but it was the government that preceded us. I saw it happen with Chrétien. I would argue that Chrétien's senior political advisors started to get supplanted by senior public servants, some of whom we continued, we kept on. And you saw some of those senior public servants say, hey, man, I'll take up as much fucking room as you give me. Like, I'll be the public policy advisor and the political advisor. I think I understand politics pretty well.
Well, Himmelfarb thought he should be Ignatieff's chief of staff.
Yeah. So,
Himmelfarb wanted to be Ignatieff's chief of staff.
For sure.
Right?
He referred to himself as the Pope.
So that's what happens. So when we talk about governmentitis and all this, we've all talked about it in various ways. One of the real tells, from my perspective, is when you let the clerk or those senior civil servants, they start to shape the entirety of the government's agenda and the advice that the prime minister receives. And the political advisors get tired and they back off, or you switch out and you're on the third variation of the office. Like that's when you know a government's getting tired, when suddenly it's all being run from the tall buildings in Ottawa.
Yeah, no, sorry, go ahead, David.
I was just going to say, and it's also, the other thing that happens is that governments become like MASH, which is that they lose key critical characters and they're replaced by shittier, less interesting characters.
Jamie Farr takes his dress off. Klinger, I liked you better when you were bucking for a Section 8.
Yeah, Scott, and to your point on staff, I remember in the 2015 campaign, like I'm sure you guys we had like a small secondary tour unit, and they coordinated working with the ridings. Like Peter MacKay would do the dog and pony show around Atlantic Canada. And I remember in 2015, there being a fight among like secondary tour staff because the stakeholder people from the PMO has decided they want it to like basically mirror what we did in government. And I'm like, but that doesn't work. Like people don't care. Like, you know, a cabinet, James Moore doing and he wasn't running in 2015, but James Moore doing a shadow announcement. Like the prime minister like makes an announcement in Regina. James Moore doing a shadow announcement in BC isn't going to get like the media market. Like the entirety of the media market is going to cover the prime minister's announcement in Regina. And it was like an ongoing struggle. I'm like, no. What people like send the secondary tour for a campaign is send Peter MacKay to Miramichi, have him go to the Tim Hortons at Renouse with Tilly, and then do an ed board with like the small papers. Like it was just so, but by that point, like they were like, you had people that were convinced that doing shadow announcements, shadow announcements across the country, that was going to drive it home.
All right. Mailbag question number 2. What is your best advice to someone working their first campaign or a good war story from your first campaign? This is sent by Anonymous. The person said, please don't use my real name. Anonymous. So here we go.
Jeez, that's kind of cryptic. Scott, you go ahead. I went first last time.
Well, Barb. Oops. Anonymous doesn't want us to reveal her name because she's working on a current campaign. What is going on in that campaign she's working on? What's happening in that local riding office? Are they planning an assassination? Is that like... listen, we can't let this get back to anybody. I think it's the same piece of advice as you get in any other walk of life. The only thing I would say is that I genuinely believe that politics and campaigns and government, when you get a new government coming in, they remain overwhelmingly a meritocracy. Because there's 8 people that will come in as regular volunteers in that early stage campaign office, and there's 12 people or 13 people that are hired into that minister's office, and 1 or 2 of them will be gamers. And if you're 1 of the 2 gamers, you will get looked. You will be identified, and you will be recruited, and you will move rapidly, and you will find yourself with as much responsibility as you can handle. That has been my genuine experience for 40 years
or more, if our history is any guide.
That's right. You'll soon find that you're being asked to do things about which you know nothing and are clearly unqualified. But I think, so to me, the obvious answer is be indispensable. Like get to that as soon as you get into that campaign office, like whether it's I will pound in more signs or I will knock on more doors or I identify a task that needs doing, make yourself so busy at it, forget your family, forget your schoolwork, forget your job, like genuinely, right? Like make yourself indispensable, throw yourself into it with 100% commitment and energy. That will get noticed, that will get recognized, you will get rewarded for that, you will get a job offer, it will go on. So that's my strong advice. Like just make yourself absolutely indispensable and work harder and show up more than the next person. And, and if you don't want to do that because that's, because you got other responsibilities, that's fine. Then you're just not going to be that person that actually makes that your thing. But if you want to make that your thing, be indispensable.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. And go in and to follow up on that point. And by indispensable, it's actually do real work. Do not walk into a campaign office and say,
I'd like to be
I'm here to do policy, communications, and strategy. I'm a strategist. Do not walk into a campaign office and say that. I like nothing bothered me more than like when I'd be sitting in a campaign office making calls or like getting ready to go knock on doors and someone would come in and say, oh, I don't really knock on doors. I do strategy and communications. Right. Awesome.
Go work on the Liberal campaign.
Yeah.
But yeah, I love to door knock, and I think regardless of what you're doing on a campaign, working the phones or going on the doors is actually extremely, extremely beneficial. I used to, during by-elections, I would like basically take names of like chief staff and MPs and PMO staff to make sure they at least did like one shift of calling. Because I think you really have to, because you can get in the bubble of not talking to people. And so every campaign I knock on doors, whether the last federal campaign and this federal campaign, I'm not involved. I'm helping, like I'll knock on doors for and do stuff for some of my friends that are out there. But I love to knock on doors because you actually get a true feeling. Like I went out in 2015 and knocked on doors in kind of not southwest, but kind of the Oakville, Burlington area, and also in BC. And it was that was like kind of then that I realized that we were in a lot of trouble. So I would suggest that regardless of what you're doing on a campaign, and regardless whether you're in a central war room or whether you're in a campaign office, go and knock on doors and talk to real people.
Jenni, what was the first? We should know this, but what was the first campaign you ever worked on?
First campaign was the 1997 Reform campaign. We had this SWAT team bus that traveled around Ontario, and we'd go to riding and door knock and campaign. And I did it for the entire. Entire campaign. And we would go to ridings. Like we never hit a riding where actually Reform had a chance of winning. We ended up like in Etobicoke North or some Toronto riding. And I was so, I wrote a little journal, and every day I'd be like, we have a real chance of winning this. Like, we're going to take this from we're going to take it from the Liberals. So we did that. We did door knock. So it was straight. And there was a lot of straight door knocking. And so there was a lot of people I met. Ray Novak, I met on that. Corey Tanaik. It was kind of it was a very fun and extremely disappointing experience on election night when the Reform Party won 0 seats in Ontario that campaign.
Well, you guys have covered the what should you do in a local campaign, so I'll take the good war story from a local campaign. My first campaign was in 1979 with a guy named Tony Merchant, who was running in the riding of Regina East. And I got sent out to get lawn sign locations, and I came back with not many, because neither the Liberal Party nor Mr. Merchant were very popular in Regina by that point in the campaign. And so I found it hard to get lawn sign locations. So they sent me out with one of Tony's most senior operatives, a guy who in his day job dealt in art, sold fraudulent art. So
we should do an entire podcast about Tony Merchant sometime, David. I would like that.
In 1979, Otto Lang was the Minister of Justice and was married to Adrienne Lang, who was Tony Merchant's sister. So Joe Ola takes me out in the middle of the day when the husbands are at work and the wives are home alone. And he takes me to houses he thinks are populated by immigrants. And he goes to the door and he says to the woman who answers the door, he says, "Hello, I'm calling on behalf of Tony Merchant, the brother-in-law of Canada's Minister of Justice." And Mr. Merchant, who is the brother-in-law of Canada's Minister of Justice, would like to put a little picture on your lawn, just over on the corner there. No problem. And if you allow us to do that, then Mr. Merchant, whose brother-in-law is the Minister of Justice of Canada, would be very pleased. And they would all agree. It was stunning how many lawn sign locations Joe would come back with. Now, they didn't all last the night, but this was my introduction to politics on the Merchant campaign. So any sense of ethics or Marquess of Queensberry rules or law, I've learned subsequent.
That's great. I think I've told this story before. My first election campaign, I'll be real fast, but this is what a keener I was. 1988 in Kingston and the Islands. Flora MacDonald is the incumbent. She's like a huge figure. Peter Milliken's running as the Liberal. We didn't necessarily think that we had a shot because, like everybody else, we were like, well, it's Flora MacDonald, right? And it's 1988, and you can see that the campaign started slipping away from a national standpoint in the last week or so, and you see the national polls and all that. But I'm like you, Jenni, right? Like, I'm like, we're going to win. We're going to win everywhere, right? Like, absolutely. And it's a free trade election, and I'm well seized and revved up, and we go in that night to the election, and I'm a scrutineer on one of the election polls, and we're trying to reconcile the vote at the end of the night. We got all the votes, and we're trying to reconcile, and we can't get them to reconcile. We keep the mark list versus the actual ballots, and I won't let anyone leave. I am such the wingtip wearing a jacket and tie knob, young liberal keener. I won't let anyone leave. I keep us there till 11:30 at night, and people are going, "Hey, the fucking election is over. Okay, Mulrooney won. Peter Milliken won in this riding. It's unbelievable. And you won't let us out of the room." And I was like, "No, our job here is to make sure that this squares up. There's something wrong. We can't contribute to any kind of fraudulent vote." That's the kind of cross-eyed, kooky, obsessive behavior you need to do in order to say,
idealism.
"Okay, yeah, yep, absolute idealism." I
love that. That makes me love you even more, Reid.
They didn't like me in that room too goddamn much, I'll tell you that.
Jenni, as senior as the roles you've been in, it's hard to care as much as you might have cared in 97, isn't it? There's just something about when you're young in this business that you get so caught up in it, right? So emotionally wrapped up in it.
I will never have been the most emotional I ever was for a loss or for a campaign was when Preston Manning lost to Stockwell Day in the Canadian Alliance leadership race. Because, Preston Manning was the first leader I loved, and I just I never thought he was going to lose. It wasn't like I was stupid. I knew that the momentum was with Stock, but I'd go to bed every night and I'd say to myself, "It's okay, Jenni, because there is 0% chance that Preston can't win this. He's absolutely going to win it." And when Stock won that leadership race, it was a very it was like a punch to the. It was like a breakup or almost a death. It was so heartbreaking. And I've taken losses bad since, and I've taken wins very good, but nothing as guttural as what that first that 2000 leadership race was.
100%.
In the late 80s, in the late 80s, when I was first getting involved, and we had that 88 election, and then there was a provincial leadership, first it was the federal leadership, obviously for Paul, and then a provincial leadership. That first 2, 3, 4 years that I was involved, and you really throw yourself into it. I can remember literally thinking to myself, and those leaderships, they particularly cut deep, right? They really, the attachment, the commitment that you toss yourself into. My buddies in university.
And you're also fighting against your own. That's the leaderships. You got to add that dynamic
The
too.
intensity of it, right? And how much it means to you. All my roommates in university took March break and went down to the Dominican. And I stayed to volunteer my time in 1990 to the Paul Martin campaign, moved up to Toronto for the week thinking, "Oh, wow, this is going to be great. I'll get 7 whole days where I can volunteer." It's insane. But I can particularly remember thinking, as you'd be working through leaderships and stuff and going, this person who's in their 40s and they're a big name in the party, and it's so cool that I've read about them in books and I've seen them on TV, and now I'm engaging with them. But their decision making around this whole issue doesn't seem to be driven by the same considerations as mine. They seem to be thinking about their career. They seem to be committed to who's going to win, and then making certain they align themselves in the main campaign. And I was literally thinking to myself at that time, I can't believe that people would make decisions this way. I can't believe they aren't doing what they want to do in their hearts, and I'll never be like that. And of course, now I'm a broken down, gray, cynical bastard. But I can literally remember thinking prominent people and go, how can they possibly make a decision based on who they think is going to win, rather than doing everything they can to make the person they want to win succeed? It's nothing like that youth.
Yep.
God. Yep. Oh my God. We should end there.
Anyway, I've got to go walk through the graveyard. I'll see y'all later.
All right. I think the last question we're going to be able to squeeze in from the mailbag is from Brian. Thank you, Brian, for this provocative question. Could Stephen Harper win again if he were a Conservative leader today? Scott.
I say no. But I'd say two additional things. I think it is literally an impossible what if, because we don't know what the Conservative Party of Canada would look like in terms of its composition and coalition if Stephen Harper remained the leader. Like, how would the party have evolved? So I think the biggest disadvantages that the party have is that they've evolved in ways that are unhelpful to their electoral cause since he left. But I don't know that that means the same thing as had he stayed, it would be perfect. So that's the first thing. So I think, I know I'm cheating, but it's a really tough question. But my guess is not. Like, if you dropped him into the campaign tomorrow, like we were joking last week, if you did drop him into the campaign tomorrow, I don't think that his personal arrival upon the scene would turn fortunes around with the Conservative Party. And I'm not sure that's even a fair question. I think the other interesting question is, I go back further. What if Mulroney came back? If you dropped 1988 Mulroney into the front of this party right now and said, step aside O'Toole, 1988 Brian Mulroney, he's going to win. He's going to run. Would he win? Would he be able to consolidate Conservatives? Or would people say, no, he's too far to the center? Or I love playing these what if games. Like, my favorite what if of all time is, what if Mulroney had won in 76? Because if he wins in 76, the leadership, 1979, he doesn't get shut out. The Conservatives don't get shut out of Quebec. He probably wins a majority government. Then you got no Canada Health Act. You got no Constitution coming home. You've got no national energy program. Like, the course of modern Canadian political history is shifted. So anyway, I love these games. I'll stop there.
Jenni, since Scott didn't answer the question, I will give you the out of not answering it either. Scott decided to answer a question of his own choosing.
That's right. But let's see.
Well, listen, I don't like hypotheticals. I think there are a lot of people within the movement right now who would love to have Stephen Harper back. They yearn for the competency and the strength that he had for the 10 years that he governed, but there are so many. I agree with Scott. There's so many factors that you just couldn't say yes or no and what have you. But as I've said many times, last week included, this is still largely a party of Stephen Harper. Most people, joined and got involved under his leadership, and I think that any leader should be hugging Stephen Harper more than not. And so I think that because I think he remains such a vital voice within the Conservative movement in Canada, and I think even more vital now because, as we've talked about, that I think at the end of the day, the day after, if it's September 20th, September 21st, if we're doing what's the aftermath pod, I think we're going to be looking west as opposed to looking in Ontario and Quebec, which we've done for almost my entire career in terms of what the fallout is. I think that what's going on in Saskatchewan and Alberta, mostly, but also in Manitoba and BC, I think that we're going to be looking west. And I think that for the Conservative movement, Stephen Harper remains the voice. His what he says and does after the next election, if the results are in the same way that we see the national polls, it's going to be very important for the movement.
All right.
What say you, David?
Well, I say if we're talking about today's Stephen Harper dropped into the current circumstance, no, I don't think he would win because I think the circumstance that he would be dropped into wouldn't give him enough time to show his strengths. And that I think it's very tough for Conservative parties to win right now. I don't think the issue set is perfect for Conservatives. There's a lot of issues out there that they are grappling with being the answer to. So I think on balance, no. But does the Conservative Party need the equivalent of who Stephen Harper was in 2003, 2004 to 6? Yes, absolutely. And I'll go back to what you said earlier in the conversation about tired governments and how platforms are developed and things like that. Stephen Harper, had a tremendous interest in building a political organization that would win election campaigns. And so built a machine that was vastly better than the Liberal machine in everything from identifying vote to getting out vote to raising money. That's no longer the case. They've fallen behind the Liberals on most of those things. And secondly, he ruthlessly focused on what is the nexus of what we want to do and what Canadians will permit us to do. And let's run on that. Let's make that our platform. Let's not reach for things that we're not going to be permitted to do that will make us unelectable. And let's not shy away from doing the things we want to do just to curry favor with the Liberal elites of the country. I thought he found a conservative sweet spot, or a sweet spot for conservatism, and he managed to convince his party of it for that entire period of time. And so I think he has really impressive political skills, more impressive than the people that have followed him. And I think in a lot of respects, as a party and a movement, they've stepped backwards since he's gone. So do they need today's Stephen Harper today? No. Did they need 2003 Stephen Harper 3 years ago? Yes.
You think you answer that question quite a bit better than Jenny and I, don't you? You feel quite satisfied with your response.
Actually, I was just waiting blankly for Jenny to respond. She's just going to smile at me, so we'll leave it at that.
You know, she's leaving here to
All
go
right,
to the Legion, where they're meeting with the Stephen Harper Returns campaign.
Who wants to start off with a "Hey You"?
Well, my hey you is I'll start. My hey you is to the Ontario Liberal Party. Like, what the fuck is going on? The Q2 numbers, the Q2 fundraising numbers came out yesterday, and the Tories raised 2.1 million. The NDP is at 1.1 million. They might have added the subsidy in there, so that
would be quite a difference, though.
It could be a difference, but the Liberal Party of Ontario, it could be a difference, but the Liberal Party of Ontario, one of the, I say to you guys are blessed with having the best brand basically for a political party almost in the Western world, raised $206,000. That's it. So I don't know what, my hey you is not to actually light a fire under them. My hey you is like, what the fuck are you guys doing?
Just quickly, Jenny, what do you think it is? Do you think the feds are hoovering up all Liberal money or what?
But like, hoovering up how? Like, people with donation limits, people can, like, it's not like someone's writing a $50,000 check to the federal Liberals and said, I'll get you guys next year. Like, with donation limits, you can go to the same, you can go to the you can go to the same. So I don't know. I have no idea. I have no idea what's going on. Listen, I'm as a conservative, I'm not complaining about it, but I think that Stephen Del Duca's got to get out of his dining room and start, I don't know, doing something in some regards, because if the Liberal Party is going to, basically at this point raise less than $1 million in the year leading into, if they stay on this trajectory in the year leading into the next election, then they're in no way going to be competitive at all.
Yeah,
one of the reasons why the party finance. Go ahead, Scott. Go ahead. Go.
Well, I was just going to say, I mean, obviously there's a touch of irony here because David and I helped to, take the party to a position where it's got fewer seats and there are signs in the Zodiac, but the challenge is gigantic, obviously, when you're in their position in terms of raising money and all that. But I wonder if they may have overinvested in underinvesting. That the party was so shattered, and that they said, okay, we got to try to get our debt out of the way. We got to really focus on cleaning that stuff up. And you're always really scared when you're in that kind of situation about spending a buck of any kind on anything. And I wonder if, because of the change in the rules that occurred in Ontario a few years back and the way that the Liberal Party government hadn't adjusted as fully as it needed to that regime, that here in opposition and desperate opposition position, that was one place where they had to divert some money and spend a little bit more creating an infrastructure. And I don't mean to be a smart aleck. I don't know the answers. This isn't my area of expertise, but it feels to me like if you're getting $200,000 in one quarter, then you needed to spend $200,000 on building up the infrastructure to allow you to get more than that out of the province.
Yeah, I think it probably is an infrastructure thing. I mean, when Kathleen changed the fundraising rules in Ontario to respond to what I considered to be the quite legitimate outrage at the practices that were occurring at Queen's Park, one of the reasons it really kneecapped the Liberal Party was because we had effectively no popular fundraising campaign, no grassroots fundraising campaign. The money was all raised off of elite, large level donations. And so when we banned those, party had no real source of revenue. So I can't be too critical about people who've not been able to build that up in the environment that they're in. But that is presumably the situation that they're in, is that they don't have the institutional capacity to raise money in digestible chunks.
No, and I'll just say, but you can, yes, they obviously don't have the infrastructure that the Ontario PC Party has, but can Del Duca not sit and make phone calls? Like, they've raised the donation limit. Like, you don't need much infrastructure to give him a list of people and like have him call and ask for donations.
Right. Okay. Scott, you got a hey you?
I do. My hey you is to the Prime Minister, and I direct it to the Prime Minister because I think the issue I want to raise is one that cannot be left responsibly in the hands of the Minister of Immigration or the Minister of D&D or the Minister of Foreign Affairs. It's something that requires absolute, complete, and full attention from the Prime Minister and his office, and summon all the machinery and power of government to make something occur. And I'm talking about this issue, which you guys may have been following, about 118 Afghan interpreters. So, there is estimated to be roughly 118 interpreters still in Afghanistan. These are people who came to our support and our aid as we were part of the Allied forces going into Afghanistan. We said, we're going to come in here and fight the Taliban. If you stand with us and help us, we will stand with you. And the sad truth is we haven't kept our promise. So, 80% of that country is now, as the U.S. withdraws, 80% of that country is now controlled by the Taliban. The very predictable is occurring. And I'm not saying that we ought to be back in there. I'm not condemning the U.S. for withdrawing or the Allied forces. We've been there a long time. But we owe a debt, and it's a moral debt to these people, and it needs to be paid. And I know, these resettlement programs, immigration is working on it day and night. They've been pushed hard by veterans and by others. But the result is not occurring. And there's only one acceptable result. There's no, working hard at it isn't a good enough answer in this place. And it's why I directed the Prime Minister. Right? We have to pour results. We have to pour resources in there to get results, because it is an absolute moral debt that we owe those people, and it's got to be paid in full.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense to me. I don't know why it isn't just a matter of course, but it seems to me that we left those people behind in Vietnam too. Those were the people grabbing at the helicopter as it took off from the top of the embassy.
Well, we did. The Americans did.
It's not uncomplicated. DND, they say, I think, to immigration, they say, immigration says, well, we'll put the settlement program in place right now. The problem is they don't know where those 118 are. Roughly 20 of them, I think, have been sort of repatriated by private, veterans groups, but that still leaves 100 of them where DND did not collect the information. They didn't track those people. And Jesus Christ, right? Those people will be jailed or murdered. Their houses will be burned down. It's an astonishing failure. DND should never have lost sight of who those people were, because we promised to protect them and we're not.
Good point. All right, my hey you goes out to prairie farmers, formerly my peeps, and they are having a bad year. A lot of attention being paid to, appropriately, the fires that are occurring in Western Canada, but equally significant is the drought that is occurring in Western Canada that has destroyed the crops of farmers across the prairies. And there's nothing worse than when, the farmers and bad weather. It's just so arbitrary and so devastating to you. I remember my dad after a bad hailstorm. So anyway, I'm thinking of the farming community out there. It matters so much to the economies of those 3 provinces and to the people of those 3 provinces. And probably time to start getting serious about Ralph's Lake Diefenbaker irrigation project for the prairies, because as the years go on, we're going to need water. Thank you for listening to the show this week, or watching if you did. Thank you, Jenny. Thank you, Scott. I had fun as always. I want to thank our presenting sponsor, TELUS, and our sponsor, CN. All of you listeners and viewers and those people who comment on the show on social media or go to iTunes, appreciate and love you all. And we'll be back in a week. And Cole Caulfield will talk to you in October.